Well, welcome everyone to the CRC Roundtable, our monthly virtual webinar series where we host targeted, inclusive, and informed conversations that match scientific advances and management needs. The webinars are designed for contribution, not consumption. So each webinar invites a diverse range of researchers, managers, and other professionals to have conversations around critical topics. The point of this is to build connectivity between all of us, provide a place to ask clumsy questions, and increase our collective understanding for decision making. As a reflection of that intent, our panelists were given 30 minutes total for presentations, allowing a full 25 minutes for discussion. These webinars are recorded, and past webinars are available on the CRC website and the Roundtable's YouTube channel. So I encourage you to check those out if you've missed some of our past episodes. Please type your name, organization, and location into the chat box so everyone can see today's webinar community. We also ask that you stay muted with your camera off while our speakers are presenting. So we like to set the stage for each webinar by asking why this topic, why now, and why these speakers. Forests are among the most valuable natural assets in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. They filter pollutants before they reach our streams and rivers, reduce flooding by absorbing and slowing stormwater, stabilize stream banks, provide habitat for wildlife, store carbon, and support local economies and communities. Healthy forests are essential to sustaining clean water, biodiversity, and the many ecological services that benefit both people and nature. Today, however, these forests are facing unprecedented challenges. Invasive species, pests, disease, habitat fragmentation, and a changing climate are placing increasing stress on forest ecosystems. While we can't eliminate every threat, healthy, resilient forests are better able to adapt to changing conditions and continue providing the environmental, economic, and social benefits that are so critical to the Chesapeake Bay region. Today's webinar builds on conversations held at a recent workshop hosted by the Chesapeake Bay Program's Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee in partnership with the Bay Program's Forestry Work Group. The workshop brought together forest scientists, land managers, and practitioners from across the watershed who explored the major ecological stressors affecting forest health and discussed which challenges are most urgent, examined how these stressors interact, and identified key knowledge gaps that limit effective action. And we're thrilled today to have some of the workshop conveners and speakers with us to share some of the information and lessons learned from that workshop. So I'm happy to introduce you to our speakers. We have Katie Brownson from the U.S. Forest Service, Craig Highfield from the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, Matt Hurd from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources Forest Service, and John Geyer from the PA Department of Agriculture. Speakers, I will gracefully let you know if we bump up against the time by turning on my camera. And attendees, please feel to drop your questions into the chat box as we go along. I'll be monitoring and using those questions for our Q&A afterwards, as well as with the questions that were submitted with registration. If we don't get to your questions during the webinar, we'll give the speakers an opportunity to address them following, and we'll share any information we receive along with the resources mentioned today during today's webinar back to you all through our follow-up email. And with that, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Katie.
Great, thanks, Melissa. I will get my screen share going here. And get into slideshow. All right, are we looking good?
Good on my end.
Great. Well, thanks so much to CRC for inviting us to present to you all today, and great to see so many new names and faces here and all the interest in this workshop. So I'll caveat our presentation today with the fact that our report is still going through the agency review process right now. So unfortunately, we can't share the full workshop report with you just yet, but we were definitely going to share it out with this group afterwards once it's all complete. But just to kick us off, I really want to thank STAC, Science and Technical Advisory Committee, for supporting us in convening this workshop, to our fantastic steering committee that really helped us kind of shape the workshop and participants and write the report afterwards. And then all of our workshop participants, we had really, really great engagement in the workshop. And of course, to my fantastic co-lead, Craig Highfield. So just to set the stage a little bit, in December, the Chesapeake Bay program put out a revised watershed agreement. And in that watershed agreement is a new healthy forests and trees outcome. And the outcome is very big and ambitious. It calls on us to conserve, manage, and restore forests and tree cover throughout the entire watershed. There's a strong emphasis on conservation throughout our outcome language, highlighted in red there. And we have an entirely new target that's focused in on forest conservation. The Bay program has been focused a lot on community tree canopy and riparian forest buffers over the years, but this specific forest conservation target is kind of a new one. So in addition to reducing the rate of forest loss, we're also going to be tracking permanent protection of forest land under this goal and looking at opportunities to manage, steward, and restore our existing forests. All right, things aren't moving. There we go. All right, so the title of the outcome is Healthy Forests and Trees. What is a healthy forest? So this is something we actually talked about a fair amount at our workshop, and the nice, short definition that we all kind of coalesced around was a healthy forest is a resilient forest. And resilient forests are able to bounce back quickly from disturbances and continue to maintain their ecological functions and continue to provide ecosystem services. And diversity is really the key to resilience at multiple scales. So having a diversity of species in forests, having a diversity of size classes within a forest, having a complex structure, having a diversity of age classes across the landscape. And having healthy forests is really foundational to the Chesapeake Bay restoration effort. If we want to conserve forests so they can stay on the landscape over the long term and continue to provide water quality benefits, we need to be taking proactive steps to help manage our forests and ensure they stay healthy and resilient. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of delay. All right, there we go. So, I think we're thinking about forest conservation really broadly. So strategic land protection has long been a focus of the Bay program. We've had a protected lands outcome. That's still a priority. Land use decision support, empowering local decision makers to conserve their trees and forests, has also been something that the Bay program has invested a lot in over the years with its high resolution land use data. But this last bullet, the active forest management, stewardship, and restoration to support functional and resilient forest ecosystems is kind of a new area of focus for the Bay program. I think the Bay program a lot of times sees a forest on the landscape and they think it's good. We just got to leave it there and make sure it doesn't get cut down. But as we're going to hear from our speakers today, forests really do require active management and stewardship to ensure that they can remain on the landscape over the long term. So now I am going to turn it over to Craig.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Katie. So we convened a two-day workshop in February of this year, which I was amazed that we could put it all together and carry it on. But I think we just had, an excellent steering committee, a vast steering committee from all walks of life on that. But it's kind of reflected on who was there in the room for this discussion. I mean, we had, everything from federal, state agencies, local municipal agencies, NGOs, academia, the forest products industry was present there, and then different universities as well. So it was an exciting group of people from really throughout the Bay watershed. So, from all physiographic provinces as well. So, and then spanning everything kind of from rural forestry all the way to, community trees. But you can see there, we had representatives from a lot of different communities. Next slide. And really what the focus was, so it was a two-day workshop and we had objectives of what we were trying to do. So this really was a collection really of learning from each other what was going on the landscape, and then having dialogue between a diverse group of people. So really on day one, we focused on identifying kind of the major stressors to forest health throughout the Bay watershed and really how they affect forest health or resiliency, water quality, and the Chesapeake Bay goals. So I think we get to discuss that for a week, but we honed it down to one day. And the second day was then to take what we learned in that first day and explore, proactive management and stewardship strategies. So kind of putting it to use, how we're going to plan into the future, and to kind of strengthen forest conservation, beyond what we typically think of forest conservation is, easements, land protection, is how can we go beyond that using silviculture, policy tools, engaging with landowners, engaging with the community. And really the last step was to develop actionable recommendations for the partnership. And that's what you'll see coming out in the report when it finally goes through the processes here. And actually, I only had 2 slides because we wanted to save time to invite 2 of our speakers or 2 of our participants from the workshop to talk to you about some of the things that they've been working on. So I'm going to kick it over to Matt Hurd, who is a regional forester of Maryland Forest Service over on the Eastern Shore. So Matt, take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to pull my slide up here, so give me a second while it loads up. All right, hopefully everybody can see that.
Yep, we got you.
And yeah, as Craig said, my name is Matt Hurd. I'm the Eastern Regional Forester for the Maryland Forest Service. I'm based out of Salisbury. So I oversee our field operations on private land and 97,000 acres of state forest, as well as doing several things statewide with many of the people on this call. So yeah, Katie did a great job of setting the stage on a broad overall level. So if we're going to have resilient forests, what are attacking them? What are our stressors? What are the issues that we're dealing with? And my short presentation here is just going to kind of break them down into 2 different categories and talk about how we can approach them so that we can say that we are actively managing towards resilient forests. So, here's a couple of pictures of what we're dealing with here on the Eastern Shore, whether it's ghost forests, southern pine beetle outbreaks, saltwater intrusion, Phragmites. We've got a lot of issues, but regardless of where you are in the bay, look at how these stressors fit into the new Chesapeake Bay Agreement. How have our stressors changed over time, and how do we expect them to change in the future? And forest management has always had challenges. Historically, the eastern forests of the U.S. Were massively harvested to build the country and get us moving west. And then we entered kind of the plantation phase from the 50s up through recently, where we had to grow as much wood as possible, as quickly as possible to meet the needs of society. And now we're in kind of like a third era here where we're really trying to still meet those sustainability goals and the needs of society while also balancing that with our ecological systems. And so with that, like Katie said, we need a diversity of age structures, forest species composition, and have that all across the landscape. We can't have everything just all be one age and one type. So that's something we've got to be combating as we move forward. And so, the stressors of today, especially anybody who's coastal, is, we got saltwater intrusion, flooding. We've all seen the wet and dry extremes within a season. We've seen the temperature extremes within every season. Every time you turn around, there's a new pest or pathogen that's causing problems and causing us to have to change how we treat a species or how we're going to preserve a species from extinction. Deer populations are a problem everywhere. Inadequate management is a big deal. As Katie said, just planting something or setting it in an easement and leaving it alone is probably not the best bet. I'm not going to say it's never the best bet, but we have our issues, and then we're always dealing with land use changes, whether it's pressure from development, solar farms, agriculture, whatever, just parcelization, where all these properties keep getting subdivided into smaller pieces, and it doesn't make it easy for it to be scalable and managed. So those are some of those, but really it all comes down to, if you're going to have a resilient forest, you have to be able to manage it. And so many of these things on an individual property are out of our control. So saltwater intrusion, yes, we can work with the academic community. We can all work together. We can find ways to mitigate this and work towards it, just like with flooding and changes in temperature and wet and dry periods. But as an individual land manager or a person who is making decisions about forests, these are things you cannot control on an individual basis. Introductions of new pests and pathogens. So you always need to be recognizing them and understanding that there's something you may have to mitigate for or adapt to, but these are the things that you're not actively controlling. And so if you're going to have resilience forests, you have to maximize what you can control. Do you have the proper species composition? Is your forests the proper density to maximize forest health? And how is that providing wildlife habitat? And so those are the things that are core to forestry and how we handle our forest properties. And really, when you focus on what you can control, you are giving the forest the best possible chance to withstand the things you can't control. And that is what really resilience means to me, is I've done the best I possibly can to make this as healthy as possible, so that when the unforeseen happens, that forest has its best chance to bounce back. And especially when we're talking about species composition and density, or if we're talking about age structure across the landscape, all of our native forests evolved responding to disturbances. And so when we do timber harvests and we do prescribed burning and different activities, all we're doing is mimicking those disturbances, because we know how those native species will respond. And so when we're doing many, many disturbances over time, we are making sure that those native species are getting the disturbances they need in order to naturally occur and hang out. Most invasive species do not like the disturbances we get when we do them over time. So that is a more natural, holistic way to fight invasive species over time. Obviously, we have outbreaks and things that are really hard to handle in a short term, but in the long term, when we're managing our forests for those native species to be at healthy densities and be at different ages across the landscape, we can handle all of our natural disturbances better, and the ones that are non-natural, like our invasive species. So it's very, very important. So you'll notice there's an asterisk under what we can control. That's because it's not dependent on the actual landowner or the land manager. It's a web, it's a supply chain. Control is conditional. You have to have forest markets. You have to have a way to make it feasible for private landowners to manage their woods. And that involves specifically low grade markets, proper forest management. All the intermediate treatments throughout the age of a forest require leaving the best and taking the worst, the stuff that's gonna be suppressed and die anyway, or has been disease ridden, or is forked and doesn't have a lot of value in the long term. Obviously, we leave some of those there. We need decomposition, we need snags and things for wildlife and stuff, so we don't completely remove them all. But low grade markets specifically are what give us what we need in order to keep forests healthy as they age and get older. And then not only do you need the markets, you need the contractors and the funding, if it is a non-commercial practice. So commercial practices are where a logger or a contractor is coming in and doing and paying the landowner for it. But invasive species removal, pre-commercial thinnings and young stands and those types of things. Those require people who are knowledgeable and can do the work, and then the landowner's got to have a way to pay for that. So, it is conditional, and we're all in this together. And so the main thing with that is, we've got to be able to maximize our resources. And so that means aligning ourselves with the forest industry and making sure that they're doing the proper things as well. But that's what permitting processes are for. That's what all these other things are for. But when we align ourselves with the forest industry and the products that they are producing are utilizing the things that we want to see removed from the woods in order for the woods to be healthy, that's the alignment we need and the alignment we have. But so many people have that stigma against working with the industry, or worried that it looks like it's just a money grab. It's very important to understand that timber harvests have objectives other than money. And it's okay to make money while you're providing habitat for bobwhite quail or for Delmarva fox squirrel or whatever it is you're managing for. It's okay to have that. In forestry, we talk about multi-use forests, and that's the whole point. The wood, the water, the wildlife, and the recreation, they all go together, and we can all have our cake and eat it too. And many of you are the outreach and partners that I have here. We need more outreach with partners. So please, when I get to the last slide, take down my information if you want to have me or one of my colleagues, if you're somewhere else, come speak to your organization and more about active forest management, because this is exciting. Like Katie said, that third bullet in her previous slide, we've focused so much on making sure we've conserved the land, and we're trying for 30. We got 30 by 30. We're going for 40 by 40. That's great. We need to conserve that land. But if those are not working active forests, it's only going to degrade and cause us major, major problems in the future. So this is very, very important. And we're literally all in this together. And right now we're in a whole bunch of these, right? Craig and the Alliance, working with Maryland Forestry Foundation, have Healthy Forests, Healthy Waters. Our federal partners have EQIP, Conservation Service Programs, the CREP program. We have the Woodland Incentive Program in Maryland. There are several landscape scale restoration grants going on right now. U.S. Forest Service landowner IRA grants, EPA climate pollution reduction grants. Right now, we're in the midst of trying to help as many landowners as possible get back to their native forest types that are actively managed and providing products for society while improving wildlife habitat and outdoor recreational opportunities. So I think I kept it in my time period there. So screenshot that, or take a picture with your phone or whatever. But there's my information, and don't let this be the last time we talk. And with that, because my Q&A, all the Q&As at the end, I'm going to cue this over to John, and I'll stop sharing so he can load his. So I think I kept that to about 10 minutes. If you guys know me, I can talk for a really, really long time. So that was pretty good for me. All right, John, I can see your presentation, so I'm going to mute and kick it over to you.
Rick, thank you. Hey, well done, Matt. Matt, Melissa, Katie, Craig, thank you all for kind of setting the stage here. And Matt, when you were talking about maximizing resources, about how harvesting isn't bad and we need to have working active forest and markets for all the materials that those forests provide to help keep them as forests. That was really like a mic drop moment for me. So thank you. Greatly appreciate you saying that and setting the stage here, because we just heard more from you about the various forest stressors and how they impact management strategies. And now I'll take a little bit of time to speak more to some of the challenges that we're seeing in that forest product market space and how that ties into management activities, but then also provide some some insight on some innovative opportunities that are close, but also ones that are potentially on the horizon, that we're getting excited about here in Pennsylvania. But before I dive into those specifics, I did want to take a little bit of time to talk about what we have here in Pennsylvania and how it's kind of unique, because within our Department of Agriculture, we have something called the Hardwood Development Council. And this was created by state legislature back in 1988 with the purpose of promotion, development, expansion, attraction, and overall support and education outreach to and for our forest and wood products industry. The work that we do is funded by a line item within Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture's annual budget that legislature approves and the governor signs. We do this work on a statewide basis, but we also partner with our regional groups called Hardwood Utilization Groups, HUGs for short, that cover the northern half of Pennsylvania. They're more like the boots on the ground that know the respective industry within their territories, and can provide the nuanced support that each of those regions specifically needs. So why did our legislators kind of have the forethought to create the Hardwood Development Council and provide funding to support that industry? Because it's an economic driver for Pennsylvania. In fact, when you look at agriculture in general and you break the various sectors up, the forest products industry is our number one agricultural industry. It has a $21.8 billion direct economic impact to the Commonwealth, a $36 billion annual economic total impact. There's over 60,000 employees, 2,100 companies. Pennsylvania itself is the leading hardwood producer in the nation in terms of hardwood lumber and also hardwood exports. So we have a great resource and we have a great industry that is well known globally. So let's dive in a little bit to markets and demand and how that kind of ties into the whole forest management conversation. So the forest market equation, really, you need markets for all the material because trees just don't produce quality high grade lumber. They produce low grade lumber, but then they also have residuals. We need an outlet for the bark. We need an outlet for the chips. We need an outlet for the pulp type material. We need those large diameter markets, those small diameter markets to have value in forest, to keep forest as forests. If we don't have those strong markets, there's going to be less incentives for private forest landowners to manage their land. Because when these markets are strong, that provides the dollars to get the management work done, and then also provides the dollars for the private forest landowners to have that forest as an investment, as well as many other reasons that folks have forests. But all throughout this, even if markets are good or bad, there's still a continued need for management activities. The forest is still growing, invasives are still providing us with pressure, trees are still aging. No matter what markets are doing, we need to find out an outlet for management and the materials that come from our forest. So let's look at some of the historical data as it relates to hardwood lumber production from the eastern US. So you can see by this graphic here, we really peaked in 1999 for hardwood lumber production. We produced 12.6 billion board feet of wood that year. And to put that number into perspective, 1 billion board feet is a bundle of lumber, which imagine it's about 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide, 8 feet long. Imagine a bundle of wood stretched all the way from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, all the way to Houston, Texas. That is 1 billion board feet of wood. It's like 1,200 miles, just a continuous line of lumber, 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide. And we produced 12.6 billion board feet in 1999. Going to recent history, we are at an all-time low since this number has been tracked, dating back to 65 years, at 4.1 billion board feet. So our industry is significantly creating less and less hardwood lumber almost year after year. We did have a slight uptick in the 2017 through 2019 timeframe. That was mainly driven by lumber exports to China. And then we did have another slight uptick post-COVID, when everyone was sitting at home with stimulus money and they wanted to renovate. There was a big surge on both softwood and hardwood. But then since then, we've seen pretty steady declines. So consumers are really what are driving that decline. They're not choosing solid wood products anymore. So where does the material go then once it is harvested? So a log doesn't, like I said earlier, a log doesn't just produce high quality lumber. Each log you're going to get high value, low value, FAS, 1 common, 2 common, 3 common, and even material that doesn't make grade. So typically, on average, a log, about half of that material will be turned into grade lumber. The other half will be turned into industrial lumber. So industrial lumber is wood pellets, wood pallets, shipping and dunnage, crane mats. So things that won't meet grade or that are more inclined to warp and twist and cut due to where they're at on the log. But then the grade lumber, so these are things that make grade. So you're going to be building your furniture, your tables, your molding and millwork out of that material. Half of that material, half of the grade lumber that is made in the US stays in the US. It's used domestically. The other half goes to the export marketplace. And countries around the world are interested in U.S. hardwoods. We offer a lot of different species with diverse color and grain. So the export market has been relatively good for us. It's about a quarter of where that log in any given forest goes. So how have export markets fluctuated over the years? 0809 was the Great Recession here, and we saw a lot of our furniture manufacturing leaving the US prior to that. But after the Great Recession, we saw a mass exodus. And countries like China and Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia started kind of picking up that manufacturing, both to provide the US marketplace with those type of products, but also their domestic consumers. You see, in 2017 here, we had a peak of 1.9 billion board feet of hardwood lumber exports. That was mainly driven by the Chinese marketplace. But the neat thing there is that the Chinese weren't manufacturing products to export it back to the US. They were actually in love with American white ash and American red oak. And some of the more affluent buyers in these countries were using US hardwood species to decorate their homes. Since then, we've seen the China marketplace kind of pull back on some of their purchases. They're now diversifying where they're purchasing wood from, but also they're purchasing less wood in general. So the export markets have been declining since 2017. And really, that's a quarter of that log, or half of the overall grade market for lumber. So switch away from your traditional like wood product now, the solid wood, and let's look at paper, because we also have to have markets for those low value, low grade, and historically that's been the pulp and paper industry. Smaller diameter logs that wouldn't meet the value end for lumber production got pulped and met the demand for the paper market. Well, since 1955 or so, there's been a steady and very consistent decline in overall paper and paperboard manufacturing, but also consumption. We're seeing less and less paper being used and manufactured. And this is kind of true all across the US. The only exception here is really when we're looking at recycled paper goods. We're seeing more and more recycled paper going into corrugated boxes to help fuel all the mass shipments of Amazon materials. So that's an encouraging component to this. However, many of those are focused on using recycled paper. So we're not using virgin forest resource to make those corrugated brown Amazon boxes. It's all recycled newspaper, office paper, etc. So bringing this conversation closer to home to the Bay region, we've seen a lot of decline in our local paper industry. The Luke, Maryland paper mill, owned by Verso back in 2019, closed their doors. They consumed nearly 1 million tons of wood fiber on an annual basis, and they provided 700 jobs to the region. Also then in Pennsylvania, in 2021, we had Apvion Paper in Roaring Springs. They consumed about 300,000 tons of woody fiber at 300 different jobs. They closed their doors too. The unique thing about those mills is that they were accepting material from our forest resource. In Pennsylvania, thankfully, we have two other mills that still do that, Pixel in York County, and then Domtar Paper up in Johnsonburg in northwestern Pennsylvania. I do want to note too that we have other paper and pulp manufacturers such as Georgia Pacific, Procter and Gamble, International Paper, but they're not using material from our forest resource. They're either importing eucalyptus pulp for their specialty products, or they're utilizing recycled paper. So they are no longer outlets for our woody biomass like they once were some 20, 30 years ago. On top of that, we're seeing increased market interruptions. So consumer confidence right now is pretty darn low. And when consumers aren't confident, they're not going to be buying as many products or spending their money. And some of the things we want to see them spending money on, especially in the forest products industry, is flooring, cabinets, furniture, molding and millwork. And if they are buying those things now, they're very cost driven. So they're looking at lower quality things that maybe look like wood but aren't actually wood. So we're seeing replacements come in. Think of your luxury vinyl tile. There's nothing luxury about turning petroleum into plastic and making it look like wood by painting it on. But it is very entry level for most consumers if they want that wood look but don't have the dollars or are willing to spend the dollars on a solid hardwood floor, even though when the ROI is mathed out, your hardwood floor is going to outlive your home most likely. You're going to get 100 plus years of life out of that, but your luxury vinyl tile, maybe you'll get 5 to 10 before you have to replace it again. On top of that, especially this past year, we've seen a ton of market disruptions on the international marketplace, whether that's tariffs or oh, Melissa, I see it just popped on. All right, I'll try to be a lot quicker. But then there's also fragmentation and parcelization. So all these are various stressors that impact our market and have provided us with some interruptions. So here in Pennsylvania, anyway, we're not necessarily losing forest land. We've remained relatively consistent, around 16.6 million acres of forest land. And this data is based off of USDA Forest Service information. In Pennsylvania, anyway, we're annually putting on 3 to 4 billion board feet of timber. Our industry is harvesting about 1 billion, but then we are losing due to natural mortality about 1 billion board feet. So we have a lot of movement in our resource, and we're still net gaining 2 billion board feet on an annual basis. All while there's various threats to the forest, some of which Matt had discussed. But the one I'm really most interested in is the underutilization of our resource and how that is impacting the forest condition itself. So some of the next numbers you're going to see are all Pennsylvania based. This takes a look back at the last 3 USDA forest inventory data sets. So you can see 2010, 2017, and 2024. Gross growth, we are relatively consistent, 4 billion board feet. Mortality, we're seeing significant increases. Harvest annually, we're seeing consistency, but net change. 2024, we didn't have as much new forest volume as we did in the previous 2 data cycles. In fact, in 2024, we lost a third of our gross growth to mortality. So what's causing that mortality? This data also comes from USDA, and it's a breakdown of the age classes and what's causing the decline in said age classes. The top graphic here showcases mortality, and I want to really highlight here the far end of it. So we're losing the most timber in 80 plus age classes to predominantly insects, disease, and weather. There's also some unknown causes, but that is the techs went out and they couldn't specifically identify one thing that caused that tree to decline. Those are coincidentally the same age classes that we're harvesting as well. Typically for the industry, you're going to be wanting to harvest those larger trees, which tend to be in those larger age classes. So how is this affecting our age class distribution across Pennsylvania? This graphic here really showcases that our age class is forming more of a pyramid as opposed to kind of that diamond shape. So more than 50% of our forest resource in the state is over the age of 80. So we're starting to see these stressors are all compounding, and we have an aging forest, and trees don't live forever. So we're seeing more and more decline in those upper age classes. At the same time, we're seeing declines in market demand for wood products. So our market equation is not really being met. We don't have robust large diameter markets. We don't have robust small diameter markets. And we don't have increased wood utilization. But at the same time, we still need forest management to occur in order to have healthy and resilient forests. So what's on the horizon, and how can we make some of this happen? There's some exciting things happening in Pennsylvania in partnership with the Ruffed Grouse American Woodcock Society. They are all about increasing habitat for those two birds, which is great habitat for most critters in Pennsylvania. But they're helping fund some of that management work because there's no outlets for the material otherwise. Other unique and innovative and exciting things that we're particularly excited about in Pennsylvania include changes to the renewable fuel standard, allowing woody biomass to be turned into renewable fuel. That can be direct into your car for gasoline or can be used for sustainable aviation fuel. Right now, typical forest management activities don't meet the requirements to obtain the subsidies that the renewable fuel standard allow for. There's a company in Pennsylvania that is looking to turn woody biomass into drop-in gasoline. There's also other opportunities on the horizon and ones that are right here. Biochar. ThinkWood is a company that's making densified and transparent wood. There's molded fiber. There's thermally modified. Mass timber is a new trend in architects and design, building tall buildings, skyscrapers with wood. And we're trying to get into that hardwood space because right now it's a softwood driven market. So there's many things that we're getting excited about that provide market diversification to ensure that management activities happen, because we need to have those outlets for the material. Because strong wood markets, which means we have outlets for the grade, the low value, the residuals, the tops, equals in turn healthy forests. And that's all why we're here. Well, we want to ensure that we have healthy and resilient forests. So Melissa, apologies for going over a little bit. Here's my contact information. Happy to take on any questions after this as well.
Great. Thank you so much. There is so much to explore here. An hour just never feels like enough, but I thank you so much for, setting the stage and really looking forward to reading about more of the conversations that were had at the workshop and some of the next steps that came out from it. We did get a question in the chat, and I'm just going to kind of read it out. Says, I'm worried that healthy forest understory is not required for an economically viable working forest. If true, then industry has no incentive to aggressively confront the problem of overabundant deer. And I will add, we had a lot of questions coming in about managing deer to relieve some of the pressure that it has on our forests. So just wanted to flag that. If not true, then what is forestry doing to vastly increase the harvesting of deer in our working forests, which is necessary for healthy understory species to return to these forests? So opening that up to the panel to get the conversation started.
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll let John talk about Pennsylvania's oak issue. Well, first of all, a healthy forest understory in the long term is absolutely essential, because if we don't handle our understory and our next set of forests, we're no longer going to function. Even if when you take industry out of it, we're just going to end up with degraded forests that are old, diseased, and dying. And if we're not opening that up to sunlight through natural disaster or harvest, we're not going to have a new understory and a new set of trees for the next generation. So it is absolutely important to have that. And so in hardwood management, you're always looking for advanced regeneration or deer fencing or whatever. Over here on the Eastern Shore, we have 97,000 acres of state forest that we manage. And everywhere that we have oaks, we're concerned that the deer population is the problem. We've got all of it's open to hunting in one way, shape, or form, and there's just not enough hunters. And especially in our suburban and urban settings, there's not enough people. Municipalities are doing, some are hiring snipers, some are doing lotteries for archery things. But the short answer is not enough is being done because the deer population is still growing. but it's not something we've been able to tackle fully yet. We've tried many things, and we're continuing to try more things. The sub comment to that was about monocultures and stuff, but the whole point of today's conversation was to say we need all types of forests at all different ages in order to maximize proper wildlife habitat and to be resilient to different stressors, whether they're diseases, pests, natural disasters, changes in climate, all of those things. If you have monocultures and all your eggs are in one basket, you're at your most risk. So monocultures is the thing we don't want. We want diversity on the landscape, and we get that through natural disasters and our own disturbances. So, and then Jonathan, talk about how Pennsylvania has been trying this for decades to try to get a handle on oak regeneration in deer.
Yeah, echoing everything that Matt just said there. I'm sharing my screen here too, just highlighting a past presentation about the deer impacts and specifically for this region. The yellow dots are moderate impact, the red dots are very high, and Pennsylvania has such a high deer density. We are struggling to deal with how to manage that. And our game commission has done all sorts of things. Increased the antlerless allocations. We have landowner tags. We have DMAPs, deer management assistant programs. Our forest products industry, they are active hunters as well, and then they also care about the forest and the future of that forest. But there's not enough contractors to do deer fencing right now. In fact, there's very few contractors that actually do that work. So it's not that our industry is not concerned about pressures. In fact, they're very concerned because deer love eating those little oaks. And we want those little oaks to grow into big oaks so we can provide those for the economic value that they have for the future. It's just a very nuanced conversation with multiple agencies, landowners, the industry, and there's really no silver bullet. There's lots of kind of hands-on approaches and a diversified way to attack the overbrowsing of deer. If we can get them to love invasives, that would be fantastic because that would be very beneficial for all of us.
We'll have to work on that for sure. Maybe some sort of taste test we can set up for them, right? Great. So one of the questions that came in ahead of time with folks' registration was really interesting, and it was asking about just what are you all seeing on the horizon in terms of innovative forest management techniques that might be on the verge of scaling up or implemented on a wider level? Just want to get a sense of what's out there that we should be looking forward to and keeping our eyes for.
I'll go first here. In Pennsylvania, we're seeing more and more use, especially from state agencies, of prescribed fire, especially as it relates to oak regeneration. In fact, I was on a prescribed fire tour last week where we're seeing before and afters, both just 1 year and then 10 years. Both our Game Commission and our DCNR are very, very interested in increasing that. And I know that there's talks about private landowner burn programs as well. So that's a tool that I feel like has been very beneficial as of now, especially in oak regeneration.
Yeah, we've also seen a major increase in prescribed burning numbers and requests from private landowners for that burning. John mentioned biochar with the importance of agriculture and how it can help with bay quality and water quality. I think biochar, it's been around, but it keeps getting more and more innovated, and I always feel like it's on the cusp of taking off at a big scale. So I still think biochar is going to be a big deal moving forward, just because of how applicable it is to the Chesapeake Bay region, and with mass timber that he mentioned, as well as thermally modified wood and other things. There's a lot of new products that are using more and more different species or smaller species to make bigger things, and that just allows us more flexibility for what we can do. All of our traditional products were made became popular and were originally made based off the things we had the most of. So when you see that red oak is or white oak is very, very popular, that's because it was made to make bourbon barrels and it was the most common tree around at that time. And so, those, and they were the native species that covered the most acreage. So, when we talk about utilizing all the different species, any product that isn't restrictive to just one species is going to be something that has the potential to be scaled up as new innovations come on as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
adding to what Matt said there about species and what their use is and their availability. So in that mass timber conversation, that's kind of focused right now on poplar because it's a low value species that don't have strong markets. But there's other species that we're also trying to get next in line, such as soft maple, which is an increasingly prevalent species in Pennsylvania. It's now our number one species by volume, as well as red oak, which is the US's most prolific hardwood species. But then I'm most excited about opportunities that replace what pulp and paper have provided us. So opportunities like molded fiber that uses pulp and paper but turns it into instead of single-use plastics, materials like that. Think of egg crates or paper plates, but it's with molded fiber and not just recycled fiber, as well as wood insulation and other opportunities that kind of have that low grade, low value market in mind. Sorry for cutting you off, Craig. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. No, that was perfect. I just would throw it out there. We're starting to see more, and we're working with forestry agencies, Maryland Forest Service and Pennsylvania Bureau of Forestry, to do more landscape management. So it's, Katie and Matt both said, our forests are getting parcelized, more and more owners owning less and less of the land. So it's a way of kind of motivating neighbors to kind of work with each other across the landscape on forest health issues rather than an individual smaller parcel. And what that does is hopefully it brings everything up to scale where you can get a technical resource provider in on a landscape that might be several hundred acres as opposed to an individual parcel that might be 10, 15 acres too. So we're starting to see some incentive cost share incentive payments for prioritizing landscape type management, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, if I could just build on that quickly, I think one of the approaches that was highlighted at the workshop was something they've been starting to do a lot more of in Pennsylvania, and I think it's starting to expand into Maryland, are these building these dynamic forest restoration blocks where they're really like doing big landscape scale plans and kind of anchoring that in some, big public land that, we have more control over, it is conserved, and then like building a network of private landowners to try to like implement forest management kind of at that landscape scale and like keeping multiple tools in the toolbox and trying to manage for biodiversity and habitat, and they're monitoring the bird populations, which is, interesting. Like, I feel like some of the comments we're seeing in the chat, I think it's really, we're not doing management just to benefit the forest products industry. Like, we're doing management because it's meeting the landowner's objectives, because it can benefit biodiversity, because it can provide water quality benefits if we're keeping forests on the landscape over the long term. And I know we kind of did a deep dive into the forest products industry, so just wanted to make sure that it's clear that it's like we're not talking about management to serve the forest products industry. We see the forest products industry as a partner in helping, make the connection and provide new sources of funding to do the management that we need to do on the landscape for all of the other reasons. So just wanted to zoom out a little bit there, and I think that some of these big landscape scale management projects that are really being done, I think a lot of times primarily for biodiversity, actually are good examples of new approaches that are rolling out on the landscape.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And sort of a related topic to the innovative forest management practices is bringing that back to workforce. The Bay program is really starting to place an emphasis on workforce development, realizing that we have an all hands on deck situation, but we need to develop that workforce to be able to come in and implement some of these practices. So from your all perspective, looking through the forest management lens, Are there certain jobs or roles that are going to be really important coming up that you see that we might need to put some emphasis on in terms of developing the workforce to be able to move in that direction?
Yeah, we're always talking about forestry contractors. So that's people that can do site prep, planting, pre-commercial thinnings, herbicide treatments when needed, especially for invasive species, tree trimming, all of the above, all the things that a landowner pays for. The reason we were talking, the reason we need the industry is because there's not landowners and the government do not have enough money to do all the management that needs to be done in order to fix all the things that are out of balance right now. And so the things that we do get grants for, or the landowner has the money to do, those contractors that can physically do the work is what's missing from the next generation. So it's not just like the industry needing more loggers and their transition plan, but it's the forestry workers. Like where I live right now, all of our consulting foresters are older, and those are the people who are helping these landowners manage their land and working with forestry contractors to get this done. And so for us, it's people that can operate machinery, know how to run a chainsaw, can apply herbicides, and can run a tree planter, or know how to properly hand plant a tree at a 12 foot by 12 foot spacing so that there's 300 trees per acre. It's like those kind of things. It's disappearing, and that's what we're most concerned about at my job.
Yeah, and I would just add to it, we work with a lot of contractors, and we always talk about scaling up to get, to handle some of this work. But a lot of the contractors we're working with are reluctant to do that without knowing, there's a good 2 years worth of work before they start adding employees, because they have to train employees, get the experience. So, that's the tough thing is I think that's why markets are important. But even, a new slug of funding that might come in through incentive programs, we got to make sure that it's there and secure for, multiple years, to be able to give assurances to these contractors so that they can scale up their businesses.
Well, one last question, and that is about local governments. Like, how can local governments get involved in forest managery to help with this building resilient forests across the watershed?
So that's something we're trying to we're working on that right now. But no, one of the main things is just dispelling how forestry works. That's one of the reasons we highlighted markets so much today, is because everybody understands easements, and we've been doing those for a long time, and grants and all those other things. But understanding this part of it is something that's been lacking. And when it comes to local governments, it's understanding your tree canopy, it's understanding what's owned by the municipality or county government, and what are you doing on those, and then how are you educating the people in your municipality or county as to what their options are for how they can make their forests better, and trying to use that outreach to feel a sense of community, so that they know that when they better their forest, they're making cleaner air and cleaner water for their neighbors and the people in their community. So for me, that's where it tends to strike some resonance, but you always got to lead by example. So you need demonstration areas, you need signage, you need all those things saying, hey, here's what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why it benefits you. And then go from there.
I agree with what Matt just said, and education and outreach is a lot of what we do here in Pennsylvania, not just to forest landowners, but to students and the general public and architects and designers, to help them better understand that science-based forest management helps promote sustainable forestry and healthier forests. But consumers are also part of that discussion. We need markets for the products that our forests produce if we want to have healthy forests.
So I have time for one more quick
Yeah, go
comment.
ahead,
Is that,
Katie.
we talked about the local government piece a little bit at the workshop, and I really wish that we had the full workshop report that I could just say, oh, here are recommendations for local governments. Here you go. But one of the things we talked about was, local like regulatory barriers to doing management may actually be like disincentivizing the management that we want to see in the landscape. If it's really expensive for folks to get in there and do kind of smaller scale, more sustainable management, they might end up doing something bigger and less sustainable. Or the landowner might just say, hey, I'm not going to manage my forest at all. I'm just going to like cut it down and convert it to a solar farm or something like that where I can make money easier. So, I think looking at kind of right sizing regulation to be supportive of the kind of management that we want to see on the landscape and making sure that we're not kind of accidentally incentivizing things that we don't actually want to happen on the landscape.
Great, thank you. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap up our session. We are at time. There's just so much we could really dig into here. I want to thank our panel for giving us their time and sharing your expertise and the thoughts that came out of this workshop. We will make sure that folks who have registered for the webinar get a copy of that report. We can send it to you. If it's not available in time for our follow-up email, we can do another email blast to make sure you all have access to that as well. So again, thank you to our panel. Thank you all to our attendees. And then please stay tuned for our next roundtable webinar in August. It'll be on the 19th. So thanks again, everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.